Welcome back to the Gen Z Speaks podcast. With me today, my other hosts, the business magnate, mogul, soon to be, Matt Gutierrez. How you doing, man?
Doing great, bro. Doing great. Got some pink balloons back here. Celebration of my baby sister.
Yes, sir. She's 1 week old now.
Week and a half.
Week and a half.
Yeah.
Nice.
Crazy.
And finally, the future of computer science and technology. Jenish, how you doing?
Doing great, brother. Looking forward to today.
Okay, so today we're going to talk about primarily a continued conversation on the Russia and Ukraine crisis, provide some updates and our commentary on it. And then we're going to talk about the trucker protests, the so-called Freedom Convoy that just ended in Canada. But before that, you want to start off with some personal updates, like how life's going, what some things that are interesting that we've been doing.
Yeah, we could do that. You want to start off?
Yeah. So recently we started this. Jenish texted me one day. He said, do you want to hold each other accountable for reading a book or something? And I said, okay. And then we told Matt about it eventually. And then all of us decided on this book. So every single month we're going to try to read one book a month and hold each other accountable for it and just discuss it. So we might as well just discuss it.
Not try.
Huh?
We're going to, don't say try.
We're going to.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're going to, for sure. We already started reading it. But the book that we chose, what's the full name of the book? I know it's The Defining Decade 20s, Higher 20s. Do you guys have the official name?
Yeah, let me check real quick.
So it's The Defining Decade, why your 20s matter and how to make the most of them now.
Yeah. So The Defining Decade, Why Your 20s Matter and How to Make the Most of Them Now. It's by a clinical psychologist, Meg Jay. And what do you guys think of the book so far?
So my first impression, I'm about, I want to say 60% through the book. I think it's been pretty solid. Compared to the books that I've read in the past, mainly kind of like self-help, mental growth, mindset type books, is just different in the sense that we hear stories from many 20-year-olds, right? And we're not just hearing it from one person's mindset. Like, sure, she's writing the book and Meg's talking about, the experiences and how her depiction of your 20s should be. But she has these ideas because of other people that she's been working with for an extended amount of time. And so throughout the book, she kind of talks about little anecdotes from each one of her clients and talks about like their main, concerns or dilemmas, stuff like that. And then she kind of relates it to, a 20-year-old's mindset, which is, there's so many options out there in the world and there's so many opportunities and there's just so much going on. It's kind of difficult to hone in and select your worldview. And so she talks about, love. She talks about, work, your growth mindset. And it's just been extremely interesting seeing how these other 20-year-olds view life and view their own, personal experiences.
I love the quotes that she uses at the beginning of each chapter. The one that kind of stood out to me was, we are born not all at once, but by bits. It's a really deep statement. And also one of the other quotes that was mentioned in the book was, how we always hear the Socrates quote, the unexamined life is not worth living. But the counter to that is the unlived life is not worth examining. So many people have these dreams and aspirations, but they kind of waste away their 20s trying to live up the life or trying not to miss out on things that everybody else is doing. And they kind of prioritize their short-term needs over their long-term goals. There's this saying that Emmanuel Acho, he's a former footballer and like a sports commentator, he always says, most people fail because they give up most people fail because they, one second, I got to pull it up, but it goes something along those lines where people fail because they prioritize their short-term needs over their long-term goals. Most people fail because they give up what they most need for what they want now. Does that make sense?
Yeah, in other words, they're looking for,
Yeah.
pleasure and happiness over, peace of state and state.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Very true.
I would
Mhm.
have to also agree with Matt. Like the one thing I find about this book that's interesting is that the examples are not just the life experience of the author, but it's about many different people and what they've been going through, right? And I think that
100%.
kind of adds like a real element to the book. It's not just one person's opinion. You're kind of um, viewing it on more of a macro scale and kind of seeing like all these different peoples have different issues in their 20s and kind of how um, you should think about approaching your 20s.
I think about this quite a bit. And, everybody in life has issues, they have dilemmas, they have like, their own demons. And it doesn't matter whether, you're starving. Obviously, that sucks, right? You don't have the necessary food, you don't have the necessary like basic goods of life. Or or you're in a different position where your family's really well to do, and you have different issues because either way they scale out because the person that does have the necessary basics and goods in life, they still have issues in their life, right? Just because one thing kind of gets taken care of, other problems arise, right? Like, I don't know if you guys have realized this, but as we're getting older and we're making money and, we have education, but like when we're in high school, right, we didn't have much money. Like, what we would do? We'd go to like BJ's on Tuesday for the Pazookies, or we'd go for like Taco Tuesday
$3
just to like,
Pizookie.
exactly. We just try to save money, right? But now that we have some money, we don't have to worry about it as much. And so
Mhm.
other problems and other things that come up in our lives, those take more precedence. And they may not be as important as like, eating or drinking water, but they still take precedence in our mind. And I just think that's really interesting because a lot of these people that she talks about, I mean, first of all, be able to get therapy and counseling, that's already a luxury, right? To be able to talk about your problems to,
Yeah.
somebody that's qualified, that's already a luxury. And I think it's interesting because not to take away from their issues, right? Like everybody has issues in life, regardless of whether, their basic needs or their actual, you're trying to elevate yourself. And I just feel like the reason I think it's interesting is because people always try to like, oh, what are you going to therapy for? Or what are you going to counseling for? Like, you don't know what problems are. But in reality, it's like, sure, they don't have like basic need problems, but they still have issues in their life that need, some reconciliation. Does that
Yeah.
make sense? I
Mm-hmm.
feel like I
For
dragged
sure.
it.
Yeah.
Okay.
No.
No, I agree with you. I feel like when we were kids, and like you said, we didn't have these like issues that we have, like, oh, we need to find a job, we need to do this, we need to pay bills or whatever. But the issues we did have, like, oh, I need to pass the AP exam or whatever, those issues back then had like the same amount of like mental toll as paying bills right now, if that makes
Fair.
sense. That's how I
Exactly.
kind of see it, right? And I just feel like as you grow up, you, you start having, everybody starts having different issues, and the issue the magnitude of the issue depends on the person. It's not about how other people see the issues, right? Or the
Right.
whatever they're dealing with. It's like a personal thing. So I definitely agree with that.
So yeah, it's I think the most fascinating part of the book is, so Meg Jay, the clinical psychologist in the book, she basically just recounts her sessions with her patients, and she just tells the stories of these patients, and she gives her comments on it and tells us, the readers, how she was able to help some of these 20-year-olds who were kind of lost in their life and trying to get back on track. And the most important point that she always emphasizes throughout the book, or whatever I've read so far, is that 30 is not the new 20. That being in your 20s is the only time in your life where you have a significant opportunity to do what you want and to change your life for the better. And that once you turn 30, those opportunities biologically and just practically change. And
Very true.
so it's a little jarring to read it, because as a 21-year-old, I only have 9 years left now, and the
Yeah.
time just is ticking, man. It never stops. So I don't know. I definitely get a little a little bit of anxiety
Yes,
as I
dude.
read it.
Have you gone to the love section yet?
No, no.
Dude, it's like once you get in, I just finished it. Um, it definitely gives you some angst, bro. It definitely gives you some angst. Just like her portrayal of how like finding your partner is, and like, it's okay. Her whole thing is, throughout like the opportunities, right? Like, sure, there's tons of girls out there for us, right? And we can go hop around, but the thing is, once you hit 30 and it's like, shoot, like now I kind of have to hurry up. And it's in reality, and her whole thing is both, right? First of all, there are a lot of options out there in the world, but do you really want to go through those options? Is that what's really the want in your brain, or is that what everybody else is doing, right? And then also, if you don't find the person by 30, like it's also okay. Like there's nothing wrong in that. Everybody takes life differently, and everybody has, their own path. So I thought that was very angsty talk, like reading through that. One thing I want to mention, you're talking about quotes. It's the one I sent you the other day. She goes, "A raft is a good thing to have when you're crossing a river, but when you get to the other side, put it down." And I think in, my personal experience, I think I'm currently
Can you say
going
one more
through,
time?
right?
Can you say one more
Yeah,
time, actually?
for sure. A raft is a good thing to have when you're crossing a river, but when you get to the other side, put it down. Right. So her whole thing with this is, if you're going through some debilitating issue in like the moment or whatever, and whether it's music that helps you out, or whether it's a run that helps you out, first of all, it's a good thing, right? Those are good things to be able to have and go through, or talking to people, like that's also a good thing. But there also gets to a point where it's too much, right? Like you're just going through it too much, and you just need to move, like make a decision and move. And it's extremely difficult. Like it's really easy to say, right? Like when you're going through a tough time, make a decision and move, make a decision and move. It's easy to say, but when you're going through it, it's just like, damn, this is difficult. Like I'm in a rut right now. And I think the most important point that she brought up when she was talking about this is, it's okay to make a wrong decision, but do something, make some decision. Don't just sit there and waddle in your own like misery. Like just move, just do something. It doesn't have to be right. Sure, like right now, you might want to be a therapist or something, but you don't have those resources. It's okay to work at a coffee shop, or it's okay to go ahead and like take on some, what was the uh, a summer camp training. Like it's okay to do these types of things because they open up doors for you. And who knows, maybe you won't want to be a counselor later on. Maybe you want to do something else, but it's these doors that you open up that'll get you to your final like goal, your final decision. So I thought that was really interesting.
I think you're 100% right. The whole idea of just moving, because when people start thinking about, I'm waiting for the right decision, I'm gonna wait for the perfect moment. The perfect moment or the right decision, that doesn't exist. Everything is in hindsight, right? You look back 10 years earlier, like, oh, I made the wrong decision. Well, you can say that now, but back then you didn't know. There's no such thing as, oh, this is the perfect decision.
Right.
Everything is in hindsight, right? So the idea is just keep moving, right? You can't think about, oh, is this right or wrong? You just got to keep going.
100%.
Have you guys heard of the paradox of choice? Like,
yes.
Yeah. So basically, for those of you who are not aware of that, it basically means that when the number of choices increase, so does the difficulty of knowing what is best. And I think this term was coined by the author Barry Schwartz in his book, The Paradox of Choice. I think he was talking more about consumer spending and how if consumers have less options in terms of what to buy, it's actually better for them or something like that. But I think
super factual.
What's that?
It's insane how true that is.
Yeah.
Like everybody thinks that once you go to Yard House, right? You go to Cheesecake Factory and you see the options, like all the food is good quality there, right? But it's just too much. And it's like the waitress comes by and says, "Hey, like, you guys ready to eat?" It's like, "No, we're not ready. We haven't got through page 2 yet," right? But the whole thing is, but then you see In-N-Out and you see Cane's and you see how much like how many people are going there to eat. They only have one option, right? It's either burgers at In-N-Out or it's chicken at Cane's.
Yeah.
Like that's literally it. But people move, right? It keeps going and going. But when you're like at Cheesecake Factory and you're looking through the menu and it's just like, oh, this is too much, and you get overwhelmed.
Right now. I think another example of that right now is also just like a simple one I think about is Netflix. Like when I go on Netflix, I'm just like, how should I spend my hour? Like what show should I watch? And then I'm just for an hour just sitting trying to find a show, Like I don't even end up watching a show. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that happens to me all the time, by the way, especially for streaming sites. I think that's one of the things that our generation especially struggles with, because we have so many options these days. And, initially it may seem like a good thing to have many options, but people struggle with making consequential decisions in their life
Right.
for a very, very long time, and that option, I think having too many options actually increases procrastination, because we're like, oh,
100%.
you know what I mean? It's
Yes.
it's weird. It's like it's true though. So
You know what the number one skill is in business?
what?
Decision-making ability.
Decision making, yeah.
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 And that's why so many people fail when they make a business, because they can't make, consequential decisions, just like you said. And it's interesting because very few people can do it. And that's why very few people are as successful as they are. And, everybody else kind of gets left in the dust because, the decisions aren't there, but the options are all there. Right. So it's just like, it's kind of like it's exactly like what you just said, a paradox, a paradox of choice.
Hmm.
Seems like a good thing, but in reality, it's not.
I wonder, I'm sure she'll talk about this, but I think a lot of our decisions are impacted by what we see around us, like our friends and our people. If we see someone else being happy and doing something, we automatically kind of want to do that.
I think you've gone there, bro. Urban tribe. When she talks about the urban tribe.
Oh, that's right. The urban tribe. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. She talks about this. I just remembered. It was.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Yeah. So it's the urban tribe, I think. And this is, I haven't read the book in 4 or 5 days, but correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the urban tribe, she basically means that people who you're around, right, all the time, like who are these people, and are their priorities and like goals aligned with yours? And like a lot of people kind of waste away a large portion of their lives because they want to be in the in group. They want to be what everybody else is doing. They don't want to be left out, right? They don't want to have this fear of missing out. And this like urban tribe can extend to like our acquaintances as well. It doesn't have to be necessarily our close friends, right?
Yeah. So how I picked it up is I kind of thought about like our three group. Like we're different in the things that we do, but I think in the things that we think about and like how we talk and how we act is very similar, right? I think like a lot of our jokes are very similar. The way we talk to each other, it just like it compiles onto each other. Right? We're all talking and then we all just adapt to it. And I think that's what she was talking about as well. It's like, sure, like the way we go about life could be similar, like we all went to college, right? But then it goes further than that. Like our personalities start to align. And then in the urban tribe, your personalities start to align. And then like not even your personality, it's like your communication style starts to align. And, if your communication starting to align and your personality starting to align, your goal setting is probably going to start to align. And, if you're in an urban tribe that, isn't very driven or isn't very opportunistic, then you're probably not going to be in the best state later on in life. And I think it was interesting to hear that, because for those people that like, I feel like us three, we're pretty driven. Like we have goals that we want to get to. And, there's very few things that are willing to stop us. Right. But those that, not necessarily are in that type of tribe, it's difficult to break out and it's difficult to find new friends. Right. Because we're in our 20s now.
Yeah.
Exactly. We're in our 20s now. And it's like the people that we're hanging around, those are probably going to be the people that we hang around for the rest of our lives. And, to find new people, it's definitely not like the easiest thing.
How crazy is that?
It's wicked.
I was in my cinematography class like 2 weeks ago, and the professor goes, find your group because you're going to be with this group for the rest of the semester. And all of us just kind of looked at each other and be like, what? Find our group. And yeah, I mean, just people just randomly, and it's going to be our group for the rest of the semester. But that thing, like that you just said, reminded me, like that group is for the rest of your life, man, decades to come. And it's reading this book. Actually, I think a 30-year-old can't read this book because they would just die of anxiety. Like almost, it would be depressing for them to read it.
Dude, we're getting anxiety and we just turned 21.
Yeah,
like that's insane, right? Well, Jed's not even 21 yet.
I think I do agree with like, we do have certain time limit and stuff like that. But I think viewing life in that way, kind of the way she's kind of more like it's like a time limit, it's like a ticking bomb. I don't think that's healthy. And I don't think we should view it like that, even though she's kind of saying it. Like, I think we should just enjoy life in the moment. Obviously I'm not saying we shouldn't grind, aspire for our goals, do all these things, right? But I don't think we should view it like, oh, there's a time, because whenever there's time associated with anything, I don't know about you guys, but I get really like anxious, right?
Anxious,
And I
yeah.
don't think that's the way to live life. That's just like torture, So I would just rather view, I agree with that. We have a certain time limit in where we're going to be able to take risks, do all these different things, try out new things. But I still think, I personally, I wouldn't view life like a time bomb where it's like, just 10
It
years
is though. It is
after
a
these
time
10
bomb
years.
though.
No, it is, but viewing it like that, it's all about perspective, right? It's about how
Yeah.
you view things, right? So, with that perspective, life just becomes super like this anxiety all day, and it's just not fun.
Yeah. Well, okay, but that's also like has to do with you, right? Like you can think of it like a time bomb, right? But it could still be healthy because you can compartmentalize things. And if you're able to compartmentalize, life and, hey, I'm on this trajectory right now. Like there's 10 things in life that are extremely important, right? Let's just say, I'm not going to name 10 things, let's name 3 things. Let's say love, let's say work, and let's say like social activities. If you can compartmentalize each thing and talk about love, like, okay, this is where I'm at right now, and this is where I want to be. How do I get there? And then you break that up by steps. And then you go into, work. This is where I want to be, and this is where I'm at right now. How do I compartmentalize each step? And then you do the same thing with social activities, right? This is where I am, this is where I want to be, et cetera. I think if you look at each compartment as like their sole being, you'll eventually get to that goal, but you're still kind of living in that time frame.
I
You
agree with
guys,
that. Kind of splitting it like if it's like, let's say it's a 10-year period, you split it into like 1 years and see,
Mhm.
I'm at in the beginning of this year, I'm at this, at the end of this year, where do I want to be at? Kind of like that, if that's how I'm kind of imagining it, right? But I also think that's a good, what you mentioned, it's like kind of you're setting up a framework for your life where you kind of um get these things that are important to you and kind of um like you said, compartmentalize it and see all the different things like love, career, social life, family. Where do you want to be by a certain end, right? Yeah. So I think that can be pretty helpful. Yeah.
have you guys seen that Steve Jobs speech at the Stanford graduation 10, 15 years ago? He says
Yes.
that every day he wakes up in the mirror. I don't know if he was like he meant it literally, but he says he wakes up, looks at himself in the mirror and tells himself, if today were the last day of my life, how would I want to spend it? And I think I actually think that's not as like, it depends, like you said, it depends on your perspective, but I think that's actually a good way to live your life because you want to maximize each day. Like we take every single day for granted. Like tomorrow is never guaranteed. So we might as well make the most of the day. That doesn't mean that it means, oh, you have to like do all these different things. It just mean you can have your own definition of making the most of the day means. Like if that means to enjoy a really good session at the gym, that can be your definition, or
For
for some
sure.
other people it could be a whole variety of things. As long as you're doing something with your day that enhances your situation in life. Does that make sense? You
Atomic
know?
habits, bro. 1% better.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just, it doesn't have to be great, but just a little bit better. Just do something that helps you out.
Also, the quote that I was trying to say that I could not remember, Emmanuel Achos quote. I think it's amazing. It goes, the reason most people fail is because they're willing to give up what they want most for what they want now.
I've heard this, dude. That is
Yeah.
really good.
Yeah.
Dude,
That's true.
okay, check this out. So when you're a kid, right, you have all these aspirations. Like you go to, you're in first grade and you go to talk to, your classmate at school. It's like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And that's a common question. Easy question, right? It may seem like an easy question. I want to be an astronaut. I want to be a firefighter. I want to be, for whatever it may be. And then you go through life and, by middle school, you're like, okay, maybe I don't want to be an astronaut, but maybe I want to be, a scientist of some sort, right? Not saying it's any easier. I'm just saying like, maybe something a little lower down the spectrum. And then you're in high school and you go through classes and it's like, shit, like this actually matters, because if I want to be a scientist, like I need to go to a good school. Maybe I need to lower my standards a little bit. And then you continue going through life, and then you get bills and you get family, and it's those standards continue to drop until you're at a point where you're just in this perpetual cycle of your life, and you're not necessarily happy. You're not necessarily sad, but you're not necessarily happy, right? Because your aspirations were never fulfilled. You wanted to be an astronaut, but now you're just like maybe a data clerk. And, you know, it's not a bad thing to be a data clerk, but it's not where you want it to be. And what you want now, just like, it just, the whole idea with pleasure, man, like with Nietzsche and this whole idea of pleasure and the now is just, it's so sad. It's sad because people get lost in it. Is that fair to say?
No, I agree with you. And I think there's a thing, okay, I don't know, maybe this is just my perspective, but I think there's a thing, I need to look more into it, but there's a thing where I think school trains you to lower your standards, or school trains you to like not, school kind of detracts you from your original dream or aspiration. And I don't know why, but I think there's some research to be done there.
Yeah, I remember teachers. Do you remember when we're in we're all in the same Dragos class, right?
Yeah, world history freshman year.
Do you remember
8 years ago?
Yes, 8 years ago. Do you remember when he
Wow.
asked us what we want to be when we're older? Do you like
No.
No,
okay,
I
I
don't
remember
remember
I
that.
remember this vividly because I'll tell you why right now. But he asked us for our name, he asked us for like what we want to learn in that class, and then what our aspiration or what we want to be when we're older. And you know, we're 14 years old here, right? And you know, at the time I wanted to be CEO of Apple. Like that was my thing. I wanted to be a CEO. And it wasn't necessarily of Apple, right? But I want to be of a big company. And I just remember the laugh. Like he laughed, and then the rest of the class laughed. And then it's in my head, I'm like, you know what? Screw these dudes. Like,
Yeah.
you know, I'm, you know, in my head, because I'm very like path driven. Like I don't care what anybody says. Like I'm a horse when it comes to my goals. Like that's just what I want is gonna, like that's where I'm running for. But it just like the thought of it, it's just like school's kind of toxic in that way, right? Like who the fuck is this? Sorry, who's to say like I'm not able to do that, right? They don't know who I am. And just like other people may say stuff like that, right? Like they don't know who, I don't know who they are, but people laugh, people like give discouragement because, you know, we might not look like Steve Jobs right now or talk like Steve Jobs right now. Like I was 14. It's just, that anecdote I thought was really interesting.
Yeah.
I think there's a beautiful Kanye West lyric that that I want to say that is like for the situation. In one of his songs, I remember he said, "This the real world, homie. School finished. They didn't steal your dreams. You don't know who did it." I think that's like true. That's actually real.
You know what's a better one? I
What?
don't want this podcast to become like a quote regurgitated. We do it a lot, but listen, you guys seen The Pursuit of Happiness, the movie, right?
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
One of the greatest films ever made. But so Will Smith, remember that scene where he's giving the basketball
son?
to his son,
Yeah.
and he says, he's talking about protecting your dreams, and I think he says something along the lines, "You have a dream, you have to protect it. People tell you you can't do something or you can't accomplish your dream because they couldn't do it. And so you have a responsibility, you know, you have a responsibility to protect it no matter what. There's no excuses." And Kobe used to say something along the same lines where he was like, people say, oh, like I'm not tall enough to play basketball, or I'm not like, you know, I'm not well read enough to go to this school or that. And it's like, it's just all the excuses. Like if you can envision something, the sky is the limit, you can do it, and there's no excuses. And then the second step is to protect the dream. There's going to be people who will laugh at you, as they did in your instance, Matt. But the thing is to just, you know, the only way you can move is forward, and that's it. So
that's also a good thing, right? When you have haters, that's like,
yeah, that motivates you, dude.
Fuck yeah, bro. That motivates the hell out of me.
Every
it's
single,
like,
yeah,
dude,
every single time
like,
I'm in the gym, I swear to you, like if I'm doing a hard set, I remember something that somebody said that was like discouraging, and I just remember their face, and I'm like, envision them punching them, and I just do an extra rep. Like I think people discouraging you, obviously there's limits to it. Like obviously bullying or like excessive bullying can definitely, like, you know, make you feel a certain way, but like I don't know, like if people,
dude, it's encouragement because in my opinion, you have a higher standard than them. They're laughing at you because they don't think that you can get there, but that also, like, you know, by their words, they can't get there, right?
Mhm.
And if they're laughing at you, that means that they have doubt in themselves, and that makes me feel good when other people doubt themselves. Like, I don't want to be a jerk or anything, but it's like, shit, like, maybe I can be better than these people. Like, maybe I can't, not sorry, that came off wrong. Not better than these people, but I can have a higher standard. I can do more. I can be more than I am, But like, let's just end on this last quote. I think this was the best Kanye quote of all time. Bow in the presence of greatness. Be stronger. All
I
jokes. Okay,
let's move on to the
let's move
Russia and
on.
Ukraine crisis. That was a good talk. I liked it.
Yeah.
So since our last podcast, Russia has now amassed 190,000 troops along the borders of Ukraine. Earlier last week, they said that a lot of these troops were leaving; they were going back to Russia, but that turned out to be wrong. And they turned out Putin was basically lying, and the troops are still there. Also, Belarus, which borders Ukraine and Russia, they were conducting military exercises in Belarus. They were supposed to be temporary, and now they're going to be continued indefinitely. And Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, said that Biden and Putin should meet. Biden was open to it, but he said that this would not happen if Russia invades Ukraine. And Putin said that a talk between them is premature. Seems to me that the pendulum is kind of swinging. Uh, Washington, D.C., under Biden is very adamant that this is going to happen. Russia is going to invade Ukraine, and Russia continues to deny it. But we all know they're lying. They're in certain instances even provoking certain parts of Ukraine into launching attacks so they can claim, oh, Ukraine actually started and we're now just defending ourselves. So it seems to be a little overwhelming. What are your guys' thoughts on the latest developments?
So personally, I think there's a good chance that Russia will invade. I mean, all signs point to it, right? But I was reading some articles and doing some research, and I've written down some reasons why maybe they might not invade, right? So let me just pull this up real quick. I actually wrote it down, okay? So one of the first reasons is that while it might seem like all the Russians are for this, that's not actually true. A lot of the young Russians in Russia are opposed to the idea of invading Ukraine. And they've done like polls and stuff that are saying that Russians are not all for invading Ukraine. Another reason, like an obvious one, is that Western sanctions will definitely hurt the economy of Russia. And their economy is already not, great to begin with. Obviously, have relations with China and other countries, but Western trading is a huge part of their economy, and that will probably harm them. Third reason is that it's going to be pretty bloody, at least like the initial part of it. Like maybe down the line, Ukraine might just pull the white flag and say, we resist, right? And or like not resist, we're done. You guys can take over. But initially, the Ukraine army is already posted up all along the borders, and they're ready to go to war. And then one of the last reasons I think is also that there's going to be a high political cost, and I think Putin kind of already has made his point, if that makes sense. Like he's already kind of stated like we have the power, we could do this, and we don't really know what Putin's agenda is fully, but we can infer and say that he wants to establish that Russia is a powerhouse, and they have certain authority over Eastern Europe. So in that case, Putin has kind of already stated his point. But those are some of the reasons why I think that maybe Russia might not end up invading Ukraine, even though there all signs do point to that happening. But there are some reasons I think that it might not happen. You guys think? What do you guys think on the points I've made? Do you think like those are?
I think your point when you say about the young people is definitely valid. I think young people in general are, they're hesitant to in terms of invading in another country. Your point, but again, the polls thing can vary, right? Like that you can have a polling sample of like 500 people, and there can be all sorts of statistical errors associated with that. But I think Russia seems to be playing a game, and the game involves the lives of thousands of Ukrainians that can potentially die, and they're treating this as some sort of like they're treating this like a like not like a chess game, but it's very concerning how they're treating the lives of these Ukrainians, and they're saying one thing and denying the other thing. Your point, I think you made a point about that Putin has already made his point. I don't know if that's true. He definitely has made a point that he's willing to go down a military path if that means that Ukraine doesn't join NATO, or to, you know, assert Russia itself in terms of our assert Russia uh, and make it stronger in terms of Eastern Europe stability and security. But I think there's more that Putin could potentially do. I mean, 190,000 troops along the Ukrainian border, and it's literally surrounded at every single part of the border is a lot. And he's spending so much money on amassing these troops. I think, and I think Putin today is going to make remarks about um, potential areas in Ukraine that it will recognize as part of Russia, like they're pro-Russian areas. And Putin today will uh, is I think he's going to make a decision whether or not to officially recognize these areas as Russia. But I think Putin's philosophy on this whole issue is that he views Ukraine as a part of Russia. They are one people, and so his thinking on this is that Ukraine is supposed to be part of Russia. That's how things are supposed to be. And if there is an opening, an opportunity for me to, you know, potentially annex Ukraine, he's saying to the rest of the world that I'm considering it and that I might as well do it. So I don't know what's going to happen. It's really hard to predict, but obviously, as U.S. intelligence has pointed out, and President Biden is saying, it's bound to happen at any
I
given
think
moment.
I think it can happen at any given moment, but I think it's gonna be really like bloody. You know, Ukraine is not just gonna give up, and I think it's gonna do a lot of harm to even the Russian army and the Russian people. And I don't know if all of the Russian people are for it, because they're, you know, it's their family members, their fathers, their brothers that
Yeah,
are
but
going to war.
Putin doesn't care about like what Russians think about their family members. I mean, 14,000 people have already died, by the way, in this whole Ukrainian Russia. Not this year, but like over the last 6-7 years, I believe, because of the war in Crimea. I remember Russia annexed Crimea back in 2014 when President Obama was in power. So 14,000 people have already died. I don't think Putin cares about the mass casualties. Maybe he does, but what he is trying to do currently, again, can result in like a whole refugee crisis. Ukrainians will start fleeing to other parts of Europe, and to a certain degree, Europe already faces a refugee crisis. So
Yeah, I mean, my opinion's similar to last week. I agree. I don't think he necessarily cares. I think it's interesting if you look at all his predecessors, they didn't care, right, about casualties. That wasn't necessarily something on their radar. I think their whole thing is we want to be great, right? And they're just trying to prove that, just like you said, Russia's trying to assert themselves. And I don't know. I think Putin's extremely unpredictable. And I don't necessarily know what's going to happen, but I think that's the overarching thing there, that he's just trying to be great.
wow. So
I just hope I
mhm.
just hope like if they do invade, it's not as bloody as I think it might be, because a lot of people are gonna die if it, because there's a certain, I don't know um how Ukraine's gonna respond to an invasion. Are they just gonna go full out war, like we're gonna start bombing, airstrikes, all this stuff, or is it gonna be more like, you know, they're gonna push up on like a certain area and then kind of fight over there? Or I don't know how that's gonna go, but I hope hoping that you know, there's not a lot of casualties in the process.
Wow, so this just happened, but Putin officially recognized um, separatist health regions in Ukraine, and so this is
As Russian territory.
yeah. So and Putin did it on state TV in Russia. So yeah,
Holy
he
Predicted
recognized.
it.
What's that?
You predicted it.
I mean, no, I didn't. Anything could happen, but yeah. So he just did it, and I mean, again, they were these areas already had a lot of like pro-Russian rebels in there, but he officially recognized these two territories. I have no idea how to pronounce them, Donetsk and Lugansk, as part of Russia. So, yeah, I honestly just don't have no idea what Putin's end goal here is.
I
He's
just hope
such
whatever I just hope whatever Russia does, I don't know how they invade or whatever. I just hope there's no use of nuclear weapons.
yeah. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, if there is, and I really hope US doesn't even get involved in this, but if they do, LA is definitely a striking point, and that's where we live.
We're
And
moving to
that's
Texas, boys.
oh man.
No,
yeah.
US is not getting involved in this
Tough.
at all. Nothing. Because NATO already said that we're not allowing. Pretty much implicitly said that we're not allowing Ukraine to join NATO.
Yeah, so this latest developments, the NATO chief condemned this. The NATO chief said that this undermines Ukrainian sovereignty, what Russia just did, which is, again, they recognize these Ukrainian separatists as part of Russia. And a lot of people are saying that this is going to pave the way for a lot of these rebels, which are backed by Russia, to face Ukrainian. So it's almost like a proxy war. But we'll see what happens. I mean, President Biden said he's going to impose sanctions. I don't think these sanctions are going to do much. Remember the last podcast I was talking about that Nord Stream that runs from Germany to Russia? I think that's the main way that Russia can be hurt because, again, a lot of their revenues come from oil. And it's interesting to see how the global economy gets impacted by this war. Stocks have already been uh, at least down in this past month, and they're not doing so great, especially in the tech world. So it's gonna be interesting to see what happens. I hope things don't escalate to war because war turns men into animals, and it's gonna lead to a lot of destroyed families. So yeah.
For sure. Let's move on to the Freedom Convoy.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people actually know about this. The Freedom Convoy basically is a group of truckers that were protesting the Canadian mandates on vaccines. I believe 90% of Canadian truckers were already vaccinated. The rest of the truckers who refused to get vaccinated, they started protesting in Ottawa. Uh, I believe that's where the Canadian capital is in that province, and they basically occupied important streets and routes which led to like trade between the US and Canada. And these blockades were blocking millions of dollars of trade revenue every day. And eventually Canadians got sick and tired of it. A lot of these protesters, were being belligerent. Some reports claim they were being violent, but long story short, uh, Prime Minister Trudeau of Canada invoked his emergency powers, which gives the government a lot of power, including freezing the bank accounts of people who were donating to these truckers. And so what is your guys' initial take on this? And for the
Yeah.
record, these protests are done now. The emergency powers, I guess, were successful in terms of dispersing away these protesters, which had been there for almost 30 days. So,
I think it was pretty brutal in that they kind of shut down their financial institutions, right? I mean, they shut down their livelihood to survive. So that's tough. I think it's also kind of funny that they shut down their crypto wallets. It just shows how far crypto's come and how far it's going to be if that's like a real breaker in breaking riots up and protests up. But yeah, I definitely think it went too far, just like you were saying. I think it went too far, and there definitely needs to be there should have been better measures taken, more productive measures taken. The only thing I can say is I see the severity of it because just how the supply chain is right now. I mean, we're backed up 4 or 5 months in products, and if 10% of your truckers are, not doing anything, or they're protesting, like that's tough. That's setting back, things even further. And, that just doesn't fly, because, we see it ourselves, right? Our prices are increasing like crazy, and, we're not getting our Amazon shipments on time. It's supposed to be 2 days, but it's really taking a week now. It's pretty wild. Yeah, sorry, Janish, go ahead.
Yeah, no, also just to your point, it's not only that the 10% are not working, but they were causing blockades for other truckers, if I'm not wrong, where
Right,
they
right.
couldn't get to certain outposts or certain places to, drop off a shipment or, take shipment. So I think that also adds to the whole economy and kind of the whole point of the shipments and trade.
But do you think Trudeau was right to invoke the emergency powers on these truckers, which are rarely used and potentially can freeze the bank accounts of people who even donated to these individuals? Isn't that I think that's a misuse of your power.
Yeah,
Like,
I think they could have done it in another way. Maybe I don't know how, but they could have done it in a different way. I think it was a bit of an overuse, right? And I believe, Ibrahim, you pointed out that um the last time these powers were used was like in World War II, which was like a real emergency, right? And I don't think this scales to a world war level of emergency.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know if it scales to a world war emergency, but we also don't know what's going on behind, closed doors. Like, maybe there's other stuff that we don't know that's happening. I mean, I guess based off of what we see, I think maybe it was a little too far, but I don't believe that an emergency, act can be initiated based on, just this. I think there has to be something else there that we just don't know about.
well, yeah, like people in Canada don't support these truckers. The majority of the people, they don't. They support these vaccine mandates. A lot of them do in mass mandates. But I think at the tail end of a pandemic, to invoke emergency powers of people who are protesting an end to these mandates, they're not asking for much. Obviously, the way they did it was absolutely wrong. Again, like I only believe in peaceful protests. Their strategy, the trucker strategy, was terrible in terms of, you know, disrupting daily life and costing millions of dollars in damage. But I think a lot of the sentiments of these truckers represent American sentiment, where a lot of people are just sick and tired of the pandemic, right? We're sick and tired of these restrictions, and we all know the pandemic is now an endemic. It's going to be endemic, right? A lot of states are getting rid of mask mandates. California just got rid of its mask mandate. So like, what is at a certain point in time, like I understand the frustration of these truckers, but again, like the way they did it was wrong.
Yeah, certainly. There's definitely frustration, but just because it's frustration doesn't mean you go ballistic, or,
Yeah. But then that
just
doesn't mean that the government can just like freeze your bank account if you donate,
very true.
you know.
It was poorly executed in all parts, seems
On
like.
both sides. Yeah.
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 Which
Okay.
happens, right? It's life.
Yeah, but these decisions, again, like these decisions can impact so much.
They
Yeah,
did,
I
right?
think
They
they have
did
like
impact.
I think they have a future impact too, on where now Trudeau maybe is more lenient on using emergency powers in another scenario, right? Where it's like, oh, I used it back then, I can use it now again as well. But realistically, they weren't supposed to be used back then.
Yeah.
Oh, back then meaning like this scenario, right? So who knows?
Kind of like, correct me if I'm wrong, but Andrew Jackson, right? Didn't that happen? Where he just kind of implemented his presidential powers in the US, and they kind of just expanded from there throughout presidencies. And it wasn't necessarily supposed to be that way.
Mm. Yeah, there's
Right.
been like so many examples of presidential overreach in our history. Yeah, Andrew
Right.
Jackson was one of them, where he was,
Central bank.
yeah, I mean, he strengthened the executive office a lot. But I'm not in favor of what Justin Trudeau did. I don't think there's other ways. Like maybe he could have negotiated with them. Like why, institute emergency powers straight away. But a lot of my last point on this is I'm worried about a lot of leaders in power who are still hesitant to consider the pandemic as endemic, and they're still like saying not to get rid of a lot of the mandates, because at a certain point in time you have to make a decision and your people for life to get back to normal. And like I think the time is now and it's past due. And if you're making decisions because you don't want to because of just your stubbornness and you don't want to go back on what you said earlier doesn't make sense to me, So I think that's
Exactly, dude. It's kind of like what we were talking about earlier. We're kind of wallowing in our misery right now. It's kind of like sitting in place, and it's kind of, I mean, it's just kind of funny, but it sucks because it's our life, and it's, millions and millions of people's lives that are just being affected by this. But yeah, we're just kind of wallowing, sitting in place.
Yeah. Well, hopefully better days are ahead. I think it's a good note to end the podcast. Enjoy the
For sure.
conversation. We'll see you guys next week. Take care.
Thanks, guys.